Hey guys, so welcome back. We got Zentangle Day 8. We got some pretty interesting stuff. I've got two patterns for us today, one called Vega, one called Purk. These patterns are pretty intricate, but they definitely add some flair to our drawings. Um, I like to think of Vega as almost like a rope, like an accent piece that we can add to things, and Purk is like a great centerpiece. It can fill an area of a loop, or a circle, or just any space with this really unique pattern. But this is Entangle Day 8. Two patterns for you today. Let's kind of get into this, all right? So as always, when we're working on projects like this, you want to make sure you have a pencil with an eraser. You may want a pen, or I advise you have a pen, and maybe even a marker, all right? And as always, when we get started, after collecting our materials, we want to kind of move to our space in our journal, and we want to create a square using four dots. For me, this takes up about half of my journal page, and I want you to imagine with your pencil, after you draw your four dots, that there's a piece of string you're laying down, and just kind of let it flow. You should be pretty used to this, but it's good to have a reminder. Now, once you kind of have this line, and I'm not really like pressing hard, I'm just kind of letting my hand flow. I'm going to pick a space in here, and I'm just going to kind of let my hand move around. And this is going to create the same thing, like a piece of string moving around. And this is going to create sections into our journal. Sorry about that, guys. And these sections are going to be what we're going to use to fill in our Zentangle patterns. And if you look at kind of this loose one I drew here, I definitely have a space, I can already tell you, where I would put my Purk. In Vega, I may have to get a little creative with, but Vega is a great pattern to kind of put along an outside edge, or if you have a very interesting line that cuts through, it's a great space for that. So let's put this aside, and let's learn these little patterns here. They're pretty cool. All right, let's start with Vega. Now, Vega, like I said, it's this line that has the tangulation, or the zentangles inside of it. So it's like a piece of rope almost, and it's braided almost like a piece of rope. It has texture. I think this looks like a rebar, but that's just me. So I'm gonna imagine I have a space here that is an oval, right? It's where like kind of two lines cross. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this right on the outside of that line, and I'm gonna try to make it as parallel as possible. Just so that there's some practical application here, okay? So this is the outside, and I can just let it fade away if I'd like. All right. Now, what we're going to start by doing is we're going to be making these X's that go across our line. And this can get a little complex because if you look, when we make the X shape, we have to then connect it to the next X shape again and again and again. But I want these lines to have this kind of over and under pattern. So by just creating these lines like they look here, you may run into things where like the X gets really skewed, where it's like way too long on the pattern. So what I like to do first is I like to go in and make my X's just like that. And this way, I know there's like a nice diamond shape in the center already. And if I mess up right now, it's not a big deal. I can just erase. So give me just a second. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to make a few X's until I'm happy with it. And if you did one that curved like I'm doing, I'm just going to kind of turn my paper and still allow my X's to happen. Got a big curve coming up here. So I may have to get a little creative like that with it. And then I'll make sure that it's finished here at the bottom as well. All right. So now that I have this X drawn into this circle, what I'm then going to do is I'm going to use my pen, and I'm going to make sure that all the ones going this direction, so kind of 45 this way, these are the ones that are going to be in the front. So using my pencil or getting my pen out now, I'm just going to go around this line. And silly I grabbed the wrong utensil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around here. I'm going to leave my pencil ends there. I can erase them in a moment. And I'll just go on either side of that line. So give me a moment. I'm going to do that, and I'll show you the next step. All right. So now that I have all the ones going in the same direction, uninterrupted, I'm going to use the back part of this line to cross over. But I'm going to make sure that when I do this, I pick my pencil up or my pen up. Let's see if I can do this so you can see it pretty well. Right here. Just going to go on either side of that line like I did last time, but I'm going to make sure that that line goes behind this line. So give me a second. I will do that, and then I'll come back to you the next step. All right, as you see, just kind of keeping this flow, one on top, one underneath. I think this is also a good time to go and do the outside line. I know that was kind of my first step here, but I always want to make sure that it's exactly the way I want it before I pin that in. So I'm going to come in, do a nice outside line here, making sure it touches all the top of my X's, and I'll do the same on the bottom. If you mess up a little bit, it's alright. Like for me, I'm not sure exactly how I want to end this one just yet, but I'm going to go and pull this line down like this. I'm going to let them run into one another. Almost like it's the rope is continuing, we just can't see it. Like it's behind something. So I may even need to like play with that a little bit to get it correct. All right. Now, the next step to this is to come in and on the insides, so any area that isn't these lines for the X, we're going to create a box or shape, and it's not going to touch these lines. So there's a little bit of area kind of in between. So if I did this here on the side, it's okay to touch the edge of my rope here, but my X's, those almost like spines, I'm going to make sure I leave a little white space, just like that, around, okay? I'm going to do this over the surface of the whole object. So, yeah, it's just going to take a second. It's not super difficult, but yeah. All right. And once I kind of fill these in, we're going to move on to the next step, which is adding value, adding a little texture. And the way the way you add value into this one is kind of thinking of this as a cylinder or as a piece of rope. So if you have an object and it's getting direct light, kind of like where that shine is, the further you go away from that light, kind of the more shadow happens. So in the center of this object, of this form here, we're going to leave it alone. But then as we get closer to the edges, I'm going to shade in just a little bit. And I can also add a little cast shadow to help it look even more three-dimensional. So I'm going to go in with a gray marker, but of course you do this with your pencil. Come in along the edges here and then smooth it just a little bit to pull it up towards the center. And if you shade too much, that's fine. Just use your eraser to knock some of that off. And to get a cast shadow, you bring a dark kind of close underneath it and use your finger and you're going to pull that value down, kind of like this is hovering a bit over top of something. So just give me a moment and then we'll move on to our next pattern. As always, when I do something with a cast shadow or a shadow, it's always a great idea after you kind of shade a little bit to come back in with your pencil and just kind of darken up the edge a little bit. This just helps create the idea, the illusion that, it's just a little darker there, just a little bit. And I always think that helps. I may have went too dark on mine, but you know what? That's okay. I'll fix it later. Not a big deal. All right. So this is Vega. I hope you use this in a creative way. Pretty interesting. I definitely am gonna need to kind of finish mine off just a smidge here, but I'll make sure that looks good. All right. So Vega day 8. Awesome. All right. The next one's called Purk, and this little guy is perfect for round shapes, uh, but it can be any shape. So if I have a space that again maybe is in a loop, or it could be an oval or an egg shape or a thumb shape. I'm just going to kind of draw a shape here. We're just going to kind of use this system to fill things in. So first and foremost, I have this curved line that is going to allow this pattern to rest on. I always start this in pencil first. And if you put these lines a lot closer together, the next steps will be a little tighter. If you put them a little further apart, they'll be a little looser. But I think this is a good spot for what I'm doing. I want you to notice though, um, the outside edge isn't really like drawn in, it's just kind of penciled in. We're going to let the lines uh, of these circles and spheres create our outside edge, which is pretty neat. So I'm going to go in here, drop these lines in, right? And you see there it's a double line, so I definitely need to add a second line there. And we're going to be drawing little circles in these lines here in just a minute. All right, so yes, nice curves. Now, the next thing I like to do here is I like to pick a center, and I'm just going to draw a line somewhere just through my object, because this is going to help me define the shape of the first ovals that are going to come in here. And the way this works is we're just going to create ovals kind of along the shape. They can be a little more round, they can be a little more narrow, but whatever you try to do, just try to make it consistent. A lot of times being consistent is more important than getting it just correctly, because if it looks consistent, it's going to look good. I'm terrible at wanting to rush ovals because of like the natural curve of my hand wants to move. Perfect. All right. So now I have this straight line. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of keep this going. I don't need to draw another line now because I have these in place. And I'm going to create ovals that just come and meet up with this pencil edge. I'm going to do this on both sides. It's going to take a second. And again, just try to be consistent and try to make it end like on the edge here. So I'm sure you can see my pencil line here, right here. So I'm going to try to bring this, I'm going to try to let it hit that line and then bring it back in like that. All right, so give me a moment and yeah, I'll be back with the next step. All right, as you see, sometimes you got to make some concessions to make it happen the way you want to. But you know what? I think this is a-okay. All right, the next step is we're going to go in and we're going to fill in the holes in between the circles like it's mortar. So that way it's like shadow, like these things are sticking off and no light's getting through. So I'm going to do that around everything. Um, Here on the bottom though, I'm going to leave it open. The bottom, the top, and the sides, I'm going to leave those alone. So here, on this one for instance, this is going to be left open. All right, the top matches pretty good, but I'm going to leave that bottom one open. All right, so I'm going to do that real quick. All right. So now I got all these little shadows kind of built in. Okay. So to move on, we're gonna do a similar thing with circles, but we're gonna do it in this really tiny thin line. And this is just gonna add a little more flourish if you see here. And it's gonna kind of like close everything together. And I'm also, similar to how we just did here with these lines, when I create a circle and I create the next circle, if I see any white space in between them, I'm gonna make sure that I fill it in. Here, this is like a brush tip pen, so it's a little wider already. So I'm not really gonna have to worry about too much. But if you have like a nice small pen, you may find little gaps, and you want to go and shade those in. And I'm going to get right close to the edge there, just like I did for these larger ovals. All right, so let's wrap this one up. And there she is. There she is. Now, of course, I'm gonna need to erase my pencil lines. I'm gonna give my stuff a little bit of time to dry. But by not kind of filling in the outsides here, this thing looks almost organic, almost alive. And I hope you notice as coloring. I have little spots where I messed up, but when you step back and look at it as a whole, you really don't focus on those things. You really don't see them. Now, when it comes to shading this guy, um, there isn't a like correct or incorrect way to do this one. You actually can leave this one alone. It's supposed to be a figure piece, something to kind of stand out. But if you're looking to add a little value, um, you could kind of think of this as lots of like beads or something on an object. So you would actually come in and you would shade around these little like gemstones or pearls almost, and you would just have to decide which way the light is hitting it. So you kind of not think of this as one large object, but a lot of smaller objects. I'm just going to do a little bit here. Hopefully that's showing up just a smidge on the camera. Again, just you would do this with graphite, just really lightly. And then of course come in and erase everything when you're done. I know these two were a little more complicated than maybe you had thought, but they're great patterns to know and have. And you know, hopefully, maybe you like some things about these, and you can come up with your own tangulations of them. But yeah, so I'll see you guys next time. Those are our two new patterns. Be good.